virtual reality for when actual life just ain't good enough. In this episode, I'm going to talk about some startups that are making waves in artificial worlds, as well as touching upon the big players in this space that are vying for dominance in what many believe could be the next frontier in digital communication. There's lots of cool stuff to explore in this one, so let's jump right in. Before I begin, the opinions expressed in this show are my own and don't reflect the views of any of the companies mentioned. This show is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Okay, virtual reality. Now, before I talk about the companies that are pioneering this space, I have to confess that I am a bit of a closeted dork, and as a result of that, I have read several sci-fi books where VR plays a lead role. Classics like Ready Player One, Snow Crash, and one of my favourite series, Demon by Daniel Suarez, to name just a few. If you're late to the party in VR and you want to know what is guiding the North Star for some of today's tech advancements, then giving these a read would be a great primer. The one spoiler being that at least in novels, it never seems to be a utopian future that is forcing people into the virtual world. But hey, novels require a conflict to resolve, whereas in the Western world, the only conflict most of us are trying to resolve is our internal dialogue. What better way to turn that off than to become an assassin or a disco Jedi? And the first company I'm going to talk about is one that, for full transparency, I have a small investment in, and that company is Sandbox VR. Sandbox created a franchise model of physical VR locations where people can go and have full out-of-body experiences, shooting zombies and recreating moments from their favourite shows like Squid Games. Now, my rationale for investing in this company was pretty simple. At the time, I recalled hearing a lot about Topgolf, which seemed to be an experience people were enjoying, and so I looked up how much Topgolf was worth, and it was over $2 billion. And I figured the footprint for Topgolf locations is going to be significantly larger than that is what is needed for VR, as not only will you get tech enthusiasts, but this is an awesome corporate offsite activity, as well as something every dad in the world is going to want to try, because it's the kind of experience you can take your kids to and pretend it's for them, but actually you're loving life. Even Joe Rogan loves this product.
You know what Sandbox is? You ever do Sandbox?
This is the...
It's the dopest. Sandbox, you're in a warehouse.
Okay.
I love it.
Also, for the record, when I made this investment, I got in at an incredible price back in 2021 when Sandbox was struggling to survive due to the pandemic. Buy low, sell high, whoop whoop. But I always believed these conditions were fairly unique and that the idea was fundamentally sound, based on, I'm sure, on the fact that they offer, and I quote, best-in-class return on investment potential. Thank you, Sandbox legal team, for that potential. Ain't nobody suing us. That aside, if you're a franchise guy or gal, do you want to open a Jack in the Box or a Sandbox VR? I really hope that somewhere in their franchise prospectus, it has that Sandbox VR owners have a higher rate of procreation. Though I say that, and I don't think I've ever met a girl that doesn't love a sneaky BK. Anyway, enough talking my own book. Another company doing amazing things is a Helsinki-based company, Varjo VR. This is technically still a startup, though later stage. They raised 40 million Series D in 2022 at a pre-money valuation of 146 million, meaning this company at the time was valued just shy of 200 million, which is pretty reasonable. I say reasonable, not because their sales justify anywhere close to that valuation, I'm sure, because I'm confident these things are not flying off the shelf at 4K a pop.
You're broke!
But my guess is that the company is basically a well-funded research project. And from digging around on the content of other YouTubers, it seems that they're doing a pretty incredible job. With one YouTuber who only covers VR highlighting that for the first time in his life, he was genuinely unable to tell what was real and what wasn't.
The really trippy part was realizing that some of the furniture was actually real in the room, but I couldn't tell the difference. I thought everything I was seeing was a simulation until my hands brushed up against something physical, and I realized at this moment in time, I legitimately do not know what is real around me and what isn't.
For the simulation theory speculators out there, this is one for the win column for sure.
Oh shit, here we go again.
So Varjo is clearly doing some pretty spectacular work, and their investors are clearly companies that are seeing utility in this device, like Volvo, who appears to be using the tech to create lifelike renders of vehicles without having to go through the whole carving clay phase, which is incredibly costly and time-consuming. But I guess my point is, even without significant sales, I see this as a potentially attractive acquisition target for some of the big tech firms. Let's say someone pays 5x and drops $1 billion to own this company, they instantly become a real player in the space. And if someone with buying power can acquire this and drive down the cogs by mass manufacturing the parts, then this might be able to reduce the cost significantly. Okay, so there are some startups to get excited about, but the thing I'm really interested in, and the reason I decided to make this video to begin with, is the huge chess match that is going on between the big boys in this space that seemingly no one is talking about. This is going to take some explaining, so bear with me. Okay, so the two big players in this space right now are Meta Quest and Apple's Vision Pro. I know there are other big names, but just bear with me here. So the first thing to point out is that clearly these two products are going after very different markets. So what you see when you trawl through YouTube is a bunch of people asking, why does this product exist? I don't get it. I'm a consumer. I'm dropping a shit ton of money on this thing, and I don't know what to do with it. And they're right to think that way in many respects. After all, Apple is largely a consumer company. But if you look at where these high-end headsets are getting traction today, it's in industries where they currently have very expensive processes that can be replaced with these high-end headsets. For example, it currently costs manufacturers over $500,000 to make a clay model, and it takes 2 to 3 months to make it. Using 3D software, however, in a VR headset, you can have a fully rendered, lifelike model to look at and move around in under a day. And that's an incredible saving. Similarly, I found another amazing use case where this charismatic chap ran through how their team is using the Vision Pro to create a more streamlined focus pulling system. Now, if you don't know what focus pulling is, it's literally the role of someone on a film set to turn the focus ring on a camera so that a subject who moves around is in focus. And believe it or not, this costs a lot of money to pull off. And so these high-end headsets are literally changing the industry and saving them a shit ton of money. In other words, value is determined by the utility you can glean from something. Is Vision Pro worth $3,500 to watch YouTube videos on? No. But I believe Apple is pulling a Tesla move here. They're creating a high-end market first, establishing a number of really great use cases, and then slowly they'll turn this into a prosumer, and then eventually just a pure consumer product, with all the bells and whistles that they worked out with the higher-end versions. It won't happen overnight. If I had to guess, that is where I think they're going with it. And if I were one of Apple's execs, I'd be very tempted to spend a couple of billion to wipe out some nascent competitors off the table. Of course, Vision Pro isn't at any risk of being challenged by Varjo right now, because Apple has the developer network and superior operating system. But you get that product in the hands of Google or whoever else has a decent developer network, and the game for that market is on. Of course, nothing stops these companies from developing their own high-end products. But when you scratch behind the surface, most of the time, breakthroughs come via acquisition. Even some of Apple's greatest products had their origins in a company called General Magic.
How small will it finally be, do you think?
Someday, Dick Tracy wristwatch.
On the subject of competition, however, Zuck has been making some straight gangster moves recently. And I'm not talking about his awkward UFC appearances. So the gangster move that Zuck recently made is that he's just turned the switch on the previously closed garden of MetaQuest OS. And he is, quote, opening up the operating system that powers the MetaQuest devices to third-party hardware makers. So what does this mean? Well, basically, when you pay $300 to $500 for a MetaQuest headset, Meta isn't making a ton of money on that. It's hardware. Basically, no one makes their money that way. The real money maker is the infrastructure or the VR app store, because it costs basically nothing to create a new game, but every time they do, cha-ching, Meta takes a cut and makes more money.
Tell them to bring me my money.
So for the last decade or so, Meta has likely been subsidizing the cost of the headset and doing everything it can to have access to the most sought-after games. And this makes them the best headset to buy, which then makes them the most attractive for game developers because they have reach to the gamers, and the virtuous cycle propagates. And in the early days of a new platform, this is genuinely a war among companies when they're vying for exclusive titles and trying to make sure that their platform is the go-to. And by and large, Meta has played its hand very well in that respect. And now they're saying, okay, we made this cheap hardware to make it accessible to consumers, but now we're opening this up so that the hardware can be its own thing. And we're cool making our money on the infrastructure layer. This is awesome news for startups in the space because soon you're going to have various headsets running MetaQuest OS. So if I'm down to drop more than $500 on some more expensive hardware with better resolution and processing power, then that's awesome. I can do that and I'm not constrained by the Quest. And the companies manufacturing the headsets no longer need to worry about the line item for software. They can pull all their efforts into making a dope headset and just run MetaQuest OS. The flip side to this, of course, is that by doing this, Meta is going to give itself such a huge advantage that it's going to be very difficult for other platforms to emerge and catch up. And so from a consumer choice standpoint, we're going to be stuck with this vanilla bullshit look and feel rather than something super dope and sci-fi that I think we were all hoping VR would become. It's not too late, Mark, but I'm telling you now, my sign-on bonus won't be cheap. That aside, I think it's interesting that the biggest players in this space, Apple and Meta, are going at this in very different ways. Meta is dominating in gaming, and Apple is best positioned to own productivity in the long run. And for startups, this is great news, as there is two very clear platforms in which to build on. We're no longer in a floor is lava situation because the foundation for the application layer is pretty sturdy. So all that's left to do is create cool shit, which is pretty exciting. Of course, I'm sure the Googles and Sonys of this world are not just going to sit back and let this one go. So we will see how this Game of Thrones shakes out. And then, of course, there is the adjacent AR race, which is a subject to itself and which is something I'll save for a future video. I could end here, but there is one other notable mention in this space right now, and that is that the next level nerds out there that own their own high-end PC purpose-built for VR gaming, there are some mods doing the rounds online that can essentially allow people to turn any flat game built in Unreal Engine and turn it into a fully immersive VR experience. This is incredible. Imagine playing Neo blasting through city streets as just one such example, and people are even messing around with the code and turning third-person experiences into first-person. So you can have a real-life shootout with the cops in GTA.
Yo, I cannot believe this is happening right now.
He's enjoying that way too much. Of course, right now this requires a lot of gaming power, hence the need for one of these neon monstrosity-looking PC computers to make it work. But if somehow, with some technical wizardry, we can take this into a cableless device, thanks to Zuck opening up the OS system, for example, and run this on higher-end headsets, then it won't be long before we can get untethered VR headsets able to play genuinely dope games from Unreal Engine's 10,000+ back catalogue. Now, I'm making a few leaps there. If it were possible, this is actually the promise of VR coming to life before our very eyes, which is pretty spectacular and is what makes me excited about technology and startups in the first place, because the collective brainpower of humanity when we work together on a shared goal is pretty impressive. And I can only imagine where this will be in another 10 years from now. That's all I've got for you today. Obviously, I'm sure I've missed a ton of awesome stuff, so I'll be sure to do a follow-up on this one in a year. I do love VR, but I'm not as into it as some others out there, so do check out other YouTube channels I've linked below. And if I've got anything wrong, please feel free to tell me in the comments and tell me what I got wrong so I can learn. Thanks for watching. Until next time, peace.